All right, welcome Mary and Holly, you're all set.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just gonna fix my screen here so I can see my slides. So we actually just are about to submit a third edition of this book that you see the screen on, or the cover there on the screen. We survived another edition. So that will, I guess I don't know what the timeline is on that for actual publishing later this year, maybe. But there is a third edition on its way. It's always, this is actually totally relevant to this talk. It's hilarious when you're weeding your own material. I have now weeded 2 editions of my own book.
I know. And even when we were late to the party, because we should have written the second and third edition, a few years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, it was our big idea. Oh, COVID, we can really get that knocked out.
Yeah. Pandemic project that did not happen. So anyway,
all the great things I was going to do during COVID.
Yeah. So I'm Holly Hibner. Mary and I will trade off. We try to do big chunks. So you'll hear me talk for a while and then I'll pass it off to Mary. And then I think we're back to me at the end. So the voice you're hearing right now is Holly.
And I'm Mary.
And that's Mary. We clearly don't take ourselves too seriously. So questions are always welcome. We'll look at whatever's in the chat when we get to the end of the program. We're going to start by talking about library missions. So the first question we want you to think about throughout this program is, does your collection in its current state help your library meet its mission? Think about what your library's mission statement is. Think about the items in your collection. How do those relate to each other? And then I'll ask you that question at the end. How can you, use what you've learned today to help your collection meet your library's mission? The second question we want to ask is, are you proud of your collection? And if you are, and we hope that you are, what is it that you are proud of? Is your collection deep or broad? Is it super current? Or do you have special collections that you're really proud of? Or do you find that you're defensive of your collection? Do you say things like, well, it's the best we can do with what we have to work with, our limited funds, our limited time, our limited space? When you visit other libraries, how do you compare your collection to theirs? These are some of the things we want you to think about as we go along today. If you've ever seen any of our presentations, you have seen this diagram before. This is what we call the collection life cycle. And the idea here, and the whole thing about our book and holistic library service, is that you don't just buy new things and weed them, and buy them and weed them, and buy them and weed them. Collection management is about so much more than selection and weeding. All of these things that you see in the diagram help you create a quality collection. You have to pay attention to the entire life cycle. This program is more dedicated to the weeding piece of the life cycle, but that is just one piece of the whole thing. We have a program based on our book called Making a Collection Count. I believe we've presented it for your consortium before. We take a more holistic approach to collection management where you pay attention to the entire life cycle. Very briefly, we're going to talk about collection management policies. They are more holistic than just selection policies. A lot of libraries have selection policies. Our own library had a selection policy for years and years, and I begged and begged and begged, please, can I make a collection management policy that covers all of the pieces of that collection life cycle, that it includes weeding, so that you can be transparent and so that you can guide your staff in creating that collection that they can be proud of. It's a good way to remind staff who are hesitant to weed or to talk about weeding with patrons that weeding is policy. It's part of the policy. It's a mandate. It connects back to the library's mission, to its vision, its value statements, its goals, its strategic plans, the objectives, all of those big picture things the collection relates to. And so you want to include all of those things in your collection management policy. We just did a big update to our collection management policy at our library. And you do have to stay on top of it. New things happen all the time, like pandemics change the way your collection is managed. And so you want to kind of stay on top of things. Our collection management policy includes general selection criteria. We talk about what formats and genres and collections for which audiences, age groups, things like that we will collect. We talk about what's available through our co-ops and our resource sharing, interlibrary loan. Just a statement that we don't try to buy everything for everyone because we have these sharing services. That's fine to put in your policy. If you use words in your policy like preservation or conservation, I would just want you to be really careful, because leaving dusty old things on a shelf for 100 years is not preservation. That's not a true archive, right? You have to maintain things. True preservation requires, like temperature controlled rooms and white gloves and all of that kind of thing. You want to include your weeding efforts in your collection management policy, and even service related things like how many copies will you buy per hold. My library has a general 5 copies or 5 holds per 1 copy. When we get to 10 copies, we'll buy another copy. I can't talk today. All right, when we get to 5 holds, we'll buy another copy. 10 holds, we'll buy another copy. 15, so it's 5 to 1 for us. So things like that can be included in your collection management policy. You'll notice that we call it collection management rather than collection development. You are not wrong either way. It is completely fine to call it collection development, but I will explain why we tend to call it collection management. We feel like the word management implies control and attention, where development implies growth. We're not always growing a collection. We're not always developing a collection. Sometimes we're just maintaining a collection, but we're always controlling what stays, what goes, what's promoted, what's displayed. All of that is part of collection management. Every piece of that collection life cycle goes into collection management. The labels that go on it, the records you link your items to, the shelving and the display, and just all of it is managing a collection. So we always say we promise not to read our slides to you, but I'm going to read the slide to you. We love this quote. It says, "A good library is like a good haircut. It's not what you cut, it's what you leave." And that is from the library system in Texas, where the Crew Manual was written, the Texas State Library. So this quote comes from that Crew Manual. And think about that. A good library is like a good haircut. When you look at someone and they have a great haircut, you're not thinking about, wow, you must have cut off just a ton of hair, right, to get this great look. You're not thinking about what was cut. You're looking at how great it looks now. It's what you leave behind on the shelf when you're weeding is what counts. So we like to play a game of keep or weed. We'll do this a few times throughout the presentation. You can just put in the chat, keep or weed. How cute is this book? It is from 1960 and it looks every minute of its age. How cute are these kids? Look very 50s actually. They're using, the safety standards are questionable. The materials and the equipment are probably not what you would find in science books for kids today. So this book might be, snatched up in a second in a book sale because nostalgia, right? It's fun, it's cute. Does this need to be in your collection? Probably not. From within that book, we have some safety rules. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see some of them are still absolutely relevant, right? Never put a penny in a fuse box. Who even has a fuse box anymore, right? We had rental properties, and 2 of our rental properties had fuse boxes. And it's like, you need to bring these up to code. When we bought the houses, even, they're like, you need to put in, what do you call them? Instead of fuses, you have, I can't remember what they're called, the switch boxes instead. Anyway, so if you have a book talking about don't put pennies in fuse boxes, and kids are like, what is a fuse box? I don't even know what that is. It's not relevant.
You have to be, breakers. Thank you for somebody.
Breakers, thank goodness. That was gonna bug me. But yes, never touch an electrical appliance, while you're bathing or when wet. That's still good advice. That kind of good advice in books from this,
And I might even add,
as well.
as what I've had a couple of experiences with, I've had librarians say this, but most of the book is still relevant. kind of
not good
missing the
enough.
point.
It's not good enough. So we
It's not
posted
good
this
enough.
book on our website way back in 2016, and we just love this comment from a reader. Jim said, "This book was in our house, and amazingly, I still have both eyes and all my fingers, toes, and limbs." So cheated death again, I guess, is what, Jim was the lucky one. So Keeper Weed, Your Power as a Woman. How much do you love this 1957 cover? That phone, the outfit she has on, this just does not pass any kind of modern feminist standards, or like just
Any standard.
any kind of human standards. But again, it's funny. I guess it's funny.
And there
All
are
it's got going
collections
for it.
out there that do collect what I call these oddball things. Chances are it's not a public library.
That's right. So within this book, you have the advice to lose weight, get a man, be more popular, dress right, be better after 40. Well, I'm after 40, so maybe this book is for me.
I'm way after 40.
One more. Burt Reynolds. I am so sad to report that he does not look like this. He did not look like this much past 1972.
And
but
also he died a couple of years ago.
I was gonna say it's yeah. People who were in the target market for this book are probably dead too. I don't know. That's not nice. I'm so sorry. But from 1972, it's hilarious. They're about all the hot, sexy letters he gets. I had to censor that photo. And the commenter said, "That's some awkward hand placement from that girl on the cover. And I know you all want to see it again. So there it is." He must have been so embarrassed by that second picture, which is the censored one here. So one last one we have. Oh, it's actually not a last one. We have one more after this. Oh no, we have a couple after this. This computer book from 1999. Look what a great time these kids are having using whatever those things are. They're not computers. They're not, mobile devices didn't really exist in 1999 the way they do now. These kids are miserable. Like, they look at the kid on the back cover pulling his hair out.
And I gotta say, Holly, I remember looking at every single picture of kids in this book, every single one. Not one kid is having a good time.
Yeah, it is too old.
And
the computer from A to Z, like, start the alphabet over.
Yeah, we have still figured out what those things are on the cover.
Yeah, I have no idea. Our good friend Barbara Taylor Bradford. Yes, it's that Barbara Taylor Bradford. How to be the perfect wife, decorating to please him. And he is just fascinated by that fabric. Like, honey, what do you think of these curtains? My husband would be like, I do not care. Like, go away. If your husband is into that kind of thing, great. Ask him his advice, work those things out together. I still do not like this title. Decorating to please him. I'm sorry. I decorate to please myself. And if he likes it, that's great. Good for him. Inside the book, they talk about Formica counters, because Formica counters will definitely please your man. And because nothing says masculinity like faux leopard print. Is that on the cover? Oh yeah, it is at the bottom there. So Barbara Taylor Bradford wrote that in 1970, and then she moved on to other things, I guess. And then, because you all need in your lives a hot dog cookbook, just unlimited do with hot dogs. Kids love them, adults adore them, and they're so easy on the budget. 250 new and exciting ways from 1968 to fix this old time favorite.
And actually, all they do is really just cut it up differently.
Yeah, look at that bottom right picture. Just cut up the hot dogs and put olives in one, and I can't even tell what those things are in the others, but they just put different stuff on the hot dogs. Put them in different ways. But the commenter said, "Ooh, not one but 4 hot dog loaves. I would say be still my heart, but that seems a bit too unwise right now." Hot dog loaf is a new one. I have never considered that. Maybe I'm missing out. I doubt it.
I doubt. Yeah.
All right, Mary, it's all you.
Okay, so we've all kind of established that, and what I'm going to say with a little caveat, this is public libraries for the most part we're talking about. Libraries are not in the business of collecting things, but providing content and access to content. That means we really just don't really collect books because they're books. We have collections that have a whole lot of different purposes. Remember, we're out about there providing information or providing the way to get information. It's not about the things, but the content and access to said things. So we really have to be paying attention that it's not about, oh, but this is so pretty or this is so great. It is, does it still do the job it was intended to do?
And this includes library of things. Like if you truly collect fishing poles and,
yeah,
telescopes and all of that, it's still not about the thing. It's about the service that the thing provides.
Exactly. So you can't get caught up in what I call the packaging. Just it's really about what is it serving the mission ultimately to provide what that person needs. And there are library things that have been doing such a great idea, but just like any other collection, if those things in the library of things aren't doing what they're supposed to do, you would need to weed it as well. So constantly being aware of, are these things still providing the content that you need? So a lot of folks need to make, I run into the reluctant weeder people all the time. And I say, if people did the most basic, and I mean no thinking involved kind of basic, first thing do, just get those duplicates out. They sell fast in the book sale, and you can kind of predict. If you notice here, we have how many copies, and these are all big bestsellers. It's not, you just maybe have 10 James Patterson year 1, maybe 8 year 2, and maybe down to 5 or 3 in year 3, 4, and 5. And besides, he writes so many so fast, it's not like those aren't around. So, but just get the duplicates out. And
it frees up a lot of space.
It frees up a lot of space and it looks neater. Second, get the stuff that is in bad shape. This is actually me holding a book we found in the stacks. This is a long time ago, but Holly and I were grossed out by it and took pictures of it. This is a mold because somebody put something back on the shelf when it was sort of wet. And one of the things I want to tell you about this is just by doing a visual inspection, you might not have caught this because it looked pristine from the outside. But when we pulled the book, it was a poof of mold spores and everything. It was gross. And we ended up having to throw out the entire shelf above and the entire shelf below because of that. And it's pretty bad. And I have a scientist friend who was training newbies in her lab, and she's like, oh, scraped a few spores. And she said that this particular mold was growing so fast, it popped off the Petri dish lid. So there are little nasty things out there in the world.
And this is an extreme example.
Extreme
but really,
example.
You can just look for things with yellow pages and rips and tears and peeling tape, dusty,
Yeah. And a lot of it is there, obviously be conscious. And I also think I like this picture for the fact that we have to make everybody aware the entire life cycle, that they need to be conscious of, like the pages should have felt comfortable telling somebody, hey, I think this is wet. But no, people didn't say anything. And that implies that our entire life cycle, one person made a decision or didn't, follow or felt they couldn't say anything for whatever reason. And we ended up losing a bunch of good books too. So you have to think about, just because one little failure in our little cycle caused some serious damage. And
how many hands did this change?
Yeah.
Like the patron didn't mention that it was wet. The circulation person that checked it in didn't notice it was wet. They put it on a cart for shelving and the page didn't notice that it was wet and they put it on the shelf. That's 3 failures.
Right.
3
So
opportunities.
you think about it, and it's easy to say, oh, the page should have done something. Well, no, there were several people involved in that whole transaction that all we need to do is make sure that people are taking a moment to really look. And that's kind of beside what this presentation is about. But I just wanted to point out that this life cycle, nothing happens in a vacuum is what I guess I want to say. You know, our actions affect, yeah, it's all part of the bigger system. But just getting some what I call less than stellar looking stuff off the shelf can free up a whole lot of space. And you know, if you got 1 and 2, then 3, just get the stupid stuff. And stupid stuff, you know, you can make your own decisions about what may be stupid there. We have a couple of great examples, and you have to wonder how some of this still gets up on the shelf. Now, a lot of these books, like I said, stupid is kind of in the eye of the beholder. I'm kind of disturbed about a cat in a wig, but if it was circulating, and okay, I guess. So you want to keep that in mind. But
you can find
the obvious stuff. I remember, and frankly, everybody has obvious stuff. It's just, even in a small collection, and I've worked in small libraries where we had less than 50,000 physical items, and all the time I would see dumb stuff show up, even though I was absolutely on top of it, I thought. It just, because the title didn't catch, it was cataloged wrong or whatever. You know, visual inspection goes a long way of your collection, and you can see the little stuff that is like, what is going on? Or, you know, checking on that. So if you did 1 and 2 and even 3, you can probably solve 90% of your weighting problems. A lot of folks just don't take that time to do what I call stuff that doesn't require too much thought. Now, because I am me and Holly is Holly, and we probably should have a 12-step program. We love these reports because we look at, you know, the data on our collection, or we're looking at all sorts of things, particularly in some collections where, you know, I have to be on top of things like the publication date, medical information, legal information, science. And so when I look at reports, I can easily sort a big collection by date published, and already that would flag something for me. And that's kind of why reports are so fun. Yeah, I did say fun. So they're part of the puzzle. I have to laugh because Holly and I have talked about this 100 times, is given the fact that Holly and I are the leading queens of evidently America and beyond, but you know, because I make a report and I pull things that are flagged on my report, that still doesn't mean I'm going to weed it. It's a way of helping you find things that your visual inspection didn't find, that your, you know, duplicates and all of those things that you were looking at. This will pick up the things that maybe would just slip through the back door and show up. And this is a wonderful way to pick those kind of things up, especially when you know the publication date is something important to pay attention to. So those are kind of it. So you can get a report that has all the books, and you can sort it by publication date. You can sort it by the date last checked out, which is always a very interesting thing. We've talked about reports a lot, and you can have so many little statistics, but again, you have to use them in context with what collection you're talking about, your library standards, and all that. But things like the publication, total circulation, date last circulated. This can also flag your attention to what I call anomalies, and anomalies can just say something that doesn't make sense. You have a best-selling Janet Ivanovich book on the shelf and you have 10 copies and they're all checked out, but you have one that shows up that it's available. Does that make sense?
Or with 0 uses ever.
Or 0 uses, exactly. So things that it calls to attention, things that have nothing to do with weeding something, but wait a minute, something's happened. One of my little sheep has gone missing or something. In other words, it's going to flag your attention to things that just don't make sense, and then a little more investigation. Because if I saw 10 Janet Ivanoviches and 9 were constantly checked out, that one's going to make me think something's wrong. It's either lost, stolen, whatever. In other words, I need to go find out what happened. And it can also flag your attention the other way. If you've got a paperback that's had 600 circulations in the last 3 years, that might be a paperback that needs some help. Maybe it's not obvious, but some of these things with high circulation means they're going to be probably heavily used. It might be just a good idea to go check on it. Maybe a piece of tape can save it, but or just check on it. But it's also circulating a lot. That's great. You need to know what's going on in your collection, and reports can help you make decisions, not just about weeding or not just about collecting, but tracking what happened to it. What's the taste of your community? I mean, there's all sorts of little things you can find out in reports that can aid you with all pieces of the collection life cycle. Holly, you got any?
Yeah, I want to add that you want to take these things in context of each other. Mary sort of hinted at that.
Yes.
Like, you don't just say the last time it circulated was 1982, we're done here. But it last circulated in 1982 and it has, 1,000 circulations and it was published that year. There's a lot of storytelling that goes in that. I see things on my shelf lists that it went out 3 times the year we bought it and it never left the shelf since. Sometimes you take something off of that new book display and it never sees the light of day again, right?
Yeah.
Some things just need a little push. Maybe I bought it last year and it did okay that year. Really hasn't gone out this year at all. If the last date circulated was last year, you have to kind of get to the why of that and put, that date last circulated, the total circulations and the publication date all together to tell the full story of what happened with that.
And I'm going to even make a caveat for 2022, 2021. We kind of can't use our 2020, 2021 data very well.
2020. We only, really had a normal, not even a quarter. Year.
So a lot of books suffer from nobody browsed me. So if you were closed or had reduced attendance for the last couple of years, you're going to have to, use these little reports with a grain of salt, because it maybe isn't reflective of what I'm going to call normal library. It might be
going on at the time.
Yeah, because we weren't open for a good 10 months. And then stop and start with a lot of our opening and closing. So that can affect the circulation, because if it's a book that is more browsable, it's not going to get it because nobody could browse. So, all right, now this is my favorite part, shift in inventory. And it's not even so much the weeding it made easy, but it takes our little data experiment or our shelf lists and really goes deep. Inventory, and I've had more directors and fellow librarians, because I came from the world of accounting to library science. I use inventory as us checking and making sure we have what we say we have. Now, it doesn't mean I close the library, as one director asked me if I was going to do that. No. And count books. No. What I was going to do is take my catalog list or shelf list, what the catalog says I have, and compare and contrast to what the shelf and my data set has. And one way to do that is a quick inventory. And a lot of folks say, oh God, you never finish, collections can be thousands and sometimes millions. And I'm not talking about all at once. Okay.
Or even all ever.
all ever. You're just going to go around. And I usually, when I take something off the new shelf, I put it through my inventory counter because that's the last time. I use the inventory function in most ILSs to say that's the last date that somebody looked at this book thoroughly. We check the catalog, and is it cataloged correctly? Is it,
is the call number accurate?
call
is it
your
in good
number,
shape?
all of those things. And we found all sorts of, when Holly and I first started this, it wasn't because we were so smart and thought, well, this is a great idea. It turned out in the early 2000s, Holly and I would think there's something in the catalog and we couldn't find it anywhere in the shelf. And we kept finding this to be true and true. And what happened was when our library went automated, back in the days before computers, they had to automate it initially. And with barcodes, and a couple of catalog iterations later, it was discovered that they didn't discard things that had been weeded years and years ago out of the system properly. And the only way we found that out is to do an inventory, and that was compare. And we started very small. I believe we used the audiobooks at the time, the audiobooks on CD. At the time, that was the newest collection. It also had the highest unit cost, which I think is important. And we couldn't believe how many, what I call discrepancies. Things like an audiobook that was actually abridged linked to an unabridged record, and vice versa. We found stuff that was checked out to other patrons, because we had all these like claims returned issues showing up. So this solved a lot of questions of, is the catalog accurate? At the time, we found it really wasn't. And so we just kept going bigger and bigger. You're never really done doing this process, but it's a way to start identifying things that might not be caught in other ways, I guess, is the best way to do it. But when we did this, it was amazing. We ended up finding extra things and finding lots of things that weren't there. And so we made corrections on both sides, to the catalog saying, well, we don't have this anymore. And on the other hand, that we fixed them, the other audiobooks, so they matched what the catalog said we had. And that ended up being a really, really helpful experiment for us. But now that's probably less of an issue, as more or less, that was almost 20 years ago. So that's probably not as much of an issue, but I still use this inventory to help me identify book by book in certain little collections. And it's a great way to see if what you have in the catalog agrees with what you have on the shelf. And it's really an interesting exercise. And it doesn't take as much horrible time as a lot of directors told me it would. So, but you could have a whole class on this part. So I'll probably shut up before.
I want to add a bit about inventory procedure.
Oh,
because
good.
if you have RFID, it goes a lot faster and it's a lot easier. It might just be a matter of one item at a time, or even a stack. Like RFID readers will let you do a stack of materials, and it just reads them through the ILS. If you have some of those accessories, like the mobile devices that take inventory, you don't even have to take the materials off the shelf. You just sort of wave the inventory reader around, and it collects the data from the RFID tags. So that's how to do it with RFID. That's like the easiest, fastest way. If you don't have RFID, it's still possible to do it. You choose your most costly or your most date dependent, or maybe even your most popular collections first. So maybe you want to do, like Mary said, the audiobooks. They're expensive, they're popular, they're constantly being checked out. Maybe you want to choose a collection where you have an inkling that there might be a bigger issue. So choose a collection and just do a piece at a time. Do fiction A, and then do fiction B. Maybe it'll take you a year to get through fiction, but it's not so overwhelming to look at all of fiction as to just do one letter at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're doing something, you're on top of it.
The other thing is those those reports will change every week because you're constantly adding and subtracting from the collection.
Yes, and
Or
that's part
things
of
are
the
being checked.
procedure.
Yeah.
Is you only run the shelf list. If you don't have RFID and you're literally running a shelf list and then going to the shelf and saying the list says this, oh, there it is, it's in good shape, open it up, how's the binding, everything looks good, check. What's the next item on the list? There it is, it's on the shelf, it's in good shape, the binding is good, whatever. The record looks right, the call number is correct, all the things you want to verify, maybe yourself a checklist. But you only do a little piece at a time, and then the next day you new shelf list for the new piece of the collection you're working on. So you're only doing, I don't know, 100 or 2 at a time, maybe. It depends on your time and what you've got to work with.
Yeah, and be honest, Holly and I, we are spoiled now because we do work for a library that has off desk times, and it's easier to schedule these things. But in the beginning of this, we were on a desk full time, and we just grab literally a shelf worth at a time and put it back. And
but
then
we were intentional about doing it every day.
Yeah,
you had to do a shelf worth every day, and it would take a half hour
tops.
Really tops 15 minutes to a half hour. You just go through a shelf and move on with your life. If you have a little more time a day, maybe do a little more.
Because most of the time it's going to be absolutely accurate. You're just, there won't be any follow-up.
Yes.
But it's those handful of items you're going to catch that actually make it worth it.
I also want to add that you don't have to do this all yourself. You can have volunteers do part of this. You probably want to do all of the verifying of the record, the call numbers and is it linked to the right record and that kind of thing. But volunteers and pages, they can cart the things up. They can even wave the RFID wand around and gather the data for you. They can do some of this for you if you're lucky enough to be. So we are located about a half hour from University of Michigan and about a half hour from Wayne State University. Both have MLIS programs. So we are surrounded by library school students who love to get this kind of experience. They will do it for free. If you could pay them, that's great. We do have paid internships at our library, but if you don't, they will love you for the experience.
And I've even had high school kids that were looking
I'm not saying take advantage of them. I'm saying, why don't you spend an hour, learn this procedure, learn this new thing, and then you're done. I'm not asking for a semester-long commitment. It's not a practicum, right? It's not an intern. It's an afternoon of volunteering to learn something that will benefit you later. So use the help available to you, volunteers, pages. Anyone can do pieces of this, the shifting especially. Once you sort of go to the shelf and figure out you've weeded the duplicates, you've weeded the bad condition, you've gone through steps 1 through 3, you've made pockets of space, now shift things into those spaces to sort of balance things out. I think
does everybody kind of get
working here? There we go. Okay. We sort of already talked about this, but go ahead, Mary.
Okay, what you'll discover, inaccurate call numbers were one of the biggest things. And these are totally things that happen normally. This is not something that was, we had a problem with, but, a quick transposition of a 747 to a 477 kind of thing. Just little things like that, mislabeled items that were marked missing, and then items that are weird. And we used Be Bold with the Bananas, and that's inside the book. Yes, that is a banana.
All kinds of things you can do with bananas in this book. And I'll just point out that book was written by the South African Banana Control Board.
Because bananas are out of control, evidently.
So that's funny.
But yeah, we have laughed at that. But one of the first things you're going to hear, but we won't have anything left. And I was like, yeah, but if all you have left is garbage, big deal,
How is that helpful?
Yeah. And if that's true, are you buying the right things? I think this adds other questions to the mix. I mean, remember, when we talk about that life cycle, there are lots of people involved in that. So if you have constantly a ton of things You might have said, wow, did we not follow policy somewhere? Or did our policy fail us somewhere? There could be bigger issues. But bad information is even more damaging than no information, in my opinion. So you probably won't have any be to the point of empty stacks, but it really is important that you have quality information on the shelf. I mean, obviously that's it's in the best things. Nothing is better than awful, if we like to say. So
And do
anyhow,
you really have nothing left? Don't forget about your electronic collections. You
yes.
have research databases, and you have, e-resources and whatever else is on the general internet. It's not that you don't have information to offer people. You have interlibrary loan, you have resources. You can get people information while you reassess the state of your collection.
Mm-hmm. And I also would recommend, if this is going to happen to you where you think you're not going to have anything left, I would suggest you have a bigger problem. Yes. Because I would not empty shelves like that because of one weeding project. That could be kind of dangerous. But the public doesn't get it, is the other excuse I hear all the time. They don't get it because you don't explain it, in a sense. You need to be keeping examples behind the desk and make sure you're talking about weeding in a sense that the public would understand. There's a couple of examples I would do. If you had people, I would put a book about cancer from the 1980s to show people that it would be so awful. If you're old enough to remember, in the 1980s, cancer was kind of a death sentence, especially breast cancer. But by the 90s and in the early 2000s, there were some big strides in that. So having old medical information is almost damaging. And those are kind of examples that you can help people understand, because the public's going to perceive this as you're just throwing away good stuff. No, you're not, for these reasons. Go slow, because I think that makes more sense to the public. When they show up and they see just like empty shelves all of a sudden, of course they're going to ask questions. But if you're constantly on top of your collection and gently weeding regularly, you should not have any problems. And like I said, be able to talk about this with your public. Nobody wants to have a policy read to them and being snotty about it, but you can say weeding is a very much a part of it. Maybe don't use weeding, call it deselection or less inflammatory remarks. When we're sitting with a bunch of librarians and I say, oh yeah, I want to put that in the dumpster, I'm not literally talking about putting in the dumpster. I'm talking about we dispose of it respectfully. But you're right, our casual language among other professionals is going to be maybe more upsetting to people that don't understand it. And Holly and I, since the beginning of Awful Library Books, you would think we were, sacrificing live puppies to, everyone, because how can you throw out their books? In other words, they weren't even asking about what kind of books they were. It was just the idea of that books. So they have this little sacred sensibility. And so having casual language could be damaging to your case for the public. But I think having time and taking time to make sure you have good talking points about weeding. Big projects definitely need a weeding talking points. But when you have somebody who's just simply asking, hey, how come that book isn't on the shelf anymore? Or, oh, why'd you get rid of it? Or why is it in the book sale? Or any of the million things, you can say, well, listen, it's just not fitting the collection policy anymore, and here's why, and have some really good talking points about it.
A friend of ours always says the phrase that she's selecting for the book sale, which I love that. I love that, the spin on that. When you are at the stacks and you're pulling items onto a cart, Mary said, go slow. People don't ask questions when somebody is putting stuff on a cart, right? When you're clearly a staff member, until you start piling it up and like clearly taking away a lot of materials. Then people are asking, what are you doing?
Yeah.
A friend of ours always says, I'm selecting for the book sale. We've got new items coming in for the shelves and I'm making space for those new items.
Yes.
Those are both positive spins.
Yeah. And like I said, there are a million reasons we can weed books, just make sure you're talking about that in a positive manner. I also think people get a little bit careless, and I know you're tired, you've got to get a chore done, and the public is saying, well, what are you doing? And then they go off on their high horse about, like, I don't know how many times people have explained my job to me. So it's tempting to get it down a little bit of a customer service hole here if you're not careful. So really,
it's important that the library board knows how to talk about this with people too. When they are out and about, and their neighbors say, I was at the library the other day and they were taking stuff off the shelf. What's going on? The board are not necessarily librarians. They don't necessarily get it either.
Mm-hmm. Yes. In fact, like I said, we've had more than one or two people, over the course of our career. Holly and I both have better than 20 years in, and you have librarians that still don't get it. So it's important. And if you are a managerial person, this is really important to communicate that this is expected in good collection maintenance. So we want to be able to talk about that, no matter if you're a page all the way up to a board member. People have to have
one of our colleagues that is now retired worked in a large library system in another state. It wasn't in Michigan.
I think it was Tennessee, maybe.
Might have been. I don't know. It doesn't even matter. The library board member asked her, when are we done building the collection? We give you money every year for the collection. When are we going to be done so we can put those funds somewhere else? And she's like, oh, honey, never. We're never done. That's not how it works. They don't understand because they didn't go to library school. So you have to make sure that the people who are representing the library, also, oh, hey, Joan next door, who you saw at the grocery store, you volunteer at the library. What's going on over there? You want them to understand the basics of the collection life cycle so that they can talk about it, not as librarians, but so they can say, oh, the friends are having a book sale. I volunteer with the friends of the library and we're getting ready for our big book sale. So they bought some new stuff for the shelves and they're giving us the oldest stuff for the book sale, and they can spin it positive like that for you.
I can't believe how many times when I've been outside the library, somebody has challenged me on something like this. I was at a funeral, no lie, and some guy was mad at a library I didn't work for because they were doing something. And of course, I have a responsibility also to not crap on another library as well. And what I did say is, this is, if you're really concerned, you should be speaking to the director and the board. That should be published on their website when they meet. It's not hard to make your voice known. And these are other talking points that support how to talk to the public about things that they are getting worked up about.
They need to be explained to, and they need to be encouraged to ask questions, not make assumptions.
Not make assumptions, exactly. I could do a whole program on this one slide, and I'm going to shut up now before Holly says.
We're at the bitter end here. We're going to leave room for questions. We've got like 2 more slides.
Okay, so avoiding the weeding frenzy, we've already eliminated this. Since we're talking to people in Florida, this was my coworker's office a long time ago.
In a previous library,
In a previous library. And this is how she lived. There's a joke that Holly and I have said all the time. If you don't know who the staff hoarder is on your staff, maybe look at yourself. So, because there's always people in libraries that do love it to the point of almost ridiculousness. You can't have everything. The particular library I was working in here, we had no room. We almost had to weed for every purchase. That's how tight it was. So, as much as you didn't want to weed some things, there wasn't, a way to do that. So the weeding frenzy is what we call trying to do too much at once or trying to save too much at once, do anything too much at once. Weeding frenzy is, in other words, I want you to settle down. It didn't get crazy. in a day or two. So take time to uncrazy it. So you might want to have, let's say, like Holly and I said, if you spent 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day doing a little weeding, you're going to be fine. And that helps.
And if
your,
if
go
you
ahead.
have this much to undo, then you need a weeding plan, and you need to be very transparent about your intentions. How many items are you removing? Where are you going to put them? How many items are being removed at a time versus total? What is the workflow? Who's involved? What are you going to do with stuff? Are you going to sell them? Are you going to dumpster them? Are you going to store them? Be very specific about your plan. Publish your plan. Make sure all levels of staff and the library board and the volunteers have access to your plan. You know, we need to use this space for something else. And so X% of this collection needs to go somewhere else or go away, or, you know, say.
I will also say that we're not talking about clinical level hoarding here or anything like that.
Of course.
But one of the problems here is we had a manager that kind of avoided talking to her about this issue. And if not everybody is aware of what the rules are, you're going to find
hold accountable.
Yeah, hold accountable and say, you know what, you have to keep your space, you know, this good or whatever. But this situation can have more implications than just overcrowding shelves. It might be certain employees that need some help. And then we go to the opposite one. If you find people that are dumpstering things, what is this look like? By the way, this is a stock photo. Isn't anything we
it's not a photo we took.
Not a photo we took, or can't even know. But appropriate and respectful removal of the library materials is also important. You can't do this. You cannot fill a dumpster up with library material. It looks careless, and it is careless. You have to have, like Holly said, when you have a weeding plan, you also have the disposal plan as part of that. And you need to have, where do these materials actually go? You know,
respectfully.
Book sale.
Garbage is garbage. Don't get us wrong.
Yeah.
Mold went, you know, bagged and garbaged.
Yes.
You can't recycle.
In other words, if you have garbage and you put it in the dumpster, make sure it looks like garbage.
Make sure it is garbage. Yeah.
It's garbage. And that means if books are in bad shape, just make sure they look like they're in bad shape. You know, very bad shape. But these can all be part of your plan. And, you know, in other words, be careful, because if it looks bad by just public opinion, it will be bad, even if it's totally.
We have 6 minutes left and lots of slides, so let's keep moving.
Let's go on. But it's historical. Oh my gosh, I don't know how many times Holly and I have said, but this is historical. Are you an archive? No, then move on with your life. If you have historiography as a research objective, then maybe we can talk about it. But historical doesn't mean old books. It means, are we looking at history through the proper eyes?
If primary sources are important to your clientele, that's great. If not, where else can they get those? The state library, a nearby university, whatever.
Okay. Comes with a bonus vinyl extra. This one makes me laugh because this was still sitting in a professional collection. I don't even think that long ago. And it's a 33.5 RPM record. So I thought that was hilarious.
A cool topic for a book, even today. Total wrong format.
Yeah. But someone needs it. Holly is the one that goes off on this book because it's a cute book, let's be honest. But take a look at the picture.
Who needs this?
Who needs this? First off, and I was the one who actually snagged this one because I had to ask my mom, who is 85, on some of the product names. Keep in mind, I'm in my 60s. So if I didn't know what it was.
So we have a kid with a claw hammer aimed at his eyes that do not have goggles on them, and a toddler with a sewing needle.
Yeah. And of course, this one is probably just a taste thing. I'm not real fond of what I say.
Mary
torturing
has a
cats.
thing about weird cats. Yeah.
So I'm like, why? Now, granted, maybe this is somebody's interest, but I keep thinking there's some kind of animal cruelty law by putting them in little outfits. So, but I don't have time, and I'm here to tell you, you do have time. You're spending too much time on something else then. And that probably is, if you don't have time, you're probably spending too much time telling people you don't have too much time.
I'm going to take this one from a manager perspective. If you are the manager, it is up to you to make sure your employees have time. You may need to schedule that time from 2 to 3 on Tuesday. You're going to be weeding. I'm taking you off desk. I'm making the time for you. If it's in your job description that this is part of your job, you have to make time. Can you imagine going to your boss and saying, I know that's part of my job, but I don't have time. I'm just not going to do that. That might go over real well. And it does not take that much time. If you keep up with it, I honestly, I do not spend that much time on the weeding piece of the collection life cycle because I'm always on top of it. It's a little bit at a time. It's a few items a week. I walk the stacks and whatever jumps out at me. I get automated ILS reports every week. They just show up in my inbox. I sort them, all the ways we talked about earlier. I have items on a watch list, and eventually I pull the trigger and get them off the shelf. It does not take a lot of time to keep up with. It doesn't draw attention from the public if you do a little at a time. Less to discard at once. Use the help available so it doesn't use your time. Walk the stacks, just see what it looks like in the collections that you manage.
If I can say, as Holly's employee for the last 20 years, yeah, I follow her around evidently. So, one of the interesting things is her as a manager is you have nowhere to go if you come to her and say, I don't have time. Because one of the brilliant things about her, if you have aspirations of management, is she's saying, what do you need for me to get you this job done? So if you need scheduled time, you talk about it with her. So there's no ever excuse. And I've always kind of enjoyed those certain employees say, well, I don't have time to do this. I'm like,
then something's gotta give, and let's figure out what that thing is.
They're not ever prepared for Holly to come back and say, okay, here's your time. So,
yeah, here's your time. Here's your help.
Yeah.
You have to make your expectations clear. If you expect collections to meet certain benchmarks, you have to make it possible, right, for them. Things have to be attainable. We're all busy. I don't have time for a lot of things either. You have to make time when it's a priority of the institution.
Yeah.
So make your expectations clear, make it a priority, and schedule it.
And I will tell you, if you're the librarian sitting at the bottom of the food chain, you probably cannot change that kind of mentality if it goes all the way up.
That's right. I'm going to go through the rest of these pretty quick because we're 10:59.
Be sure to tell them my story on this.
Yes. So Mary weeded a Newbery honor book and called it the miscongeniality of awards. And that didn't go over real well with her director at the time. But she was making the point that I don't care what award it won. If our patrons don't like it and it's a shelf sitter, it's got to go. I don't care if it's an award winner. That is criteria to give it an extra look and an extra push and a reason to have it. It's not a reason to keep it. And it's certainly not a reason to keep it forever. Neither is a gift from a patron. This book was donated in loving memory of. We are thrilled to book plate books that people donate in memory of someone. That is such a nice thing to do. But the criteria for weeding doesn't change based on how you acquired the material. You have to include gifts in your collection policy. This applies to donations as well. Say thank you, accept what you can, recycle and sell the rest.
What I've seen done in the past is when the person is giving it, most of the librarians I've worked with have said, I just want you to know that if this book no longer works, we're going to move your gift plate to a newer edition or a newer. Absolutely. That makes it so much easier. So they know it's a perpetuity kind of thing.
Right.
If that
we also push them to choose items that have more lasting value.
Yes.
Okay, but it's in good shape is not a reason to keep things. This particular book, which is clearly very, I don't know, 50s, 60s,
Yes.
the binding cracked when it opened. No one liked it even back then. It's in good shape. We should keep it. It's in good shape because no one wants to look at it.
In other words, it doesn't have to be necessarily a bad book. It just, it's not
That's right.
popular here, and it might work somewhere else. That's the other part of it.
Poor Anne McCaffrey was taking up so much shelf space because she had so many wonderful books. She's not writing anymore. She is deceased. We don't keep things because they're a part of a series. Now, you do have some hard choices to make. Do you keep the first couple of a series to get people hooked and then use interlibrary loan to help them finish the series? Do you only buy, get rid of the first part of the series and only buy new ones as they come out for authors that are still writing? You have to decide what's going to work in your situation. For older series, note who else in your ILL network owns these things. Are they readily available? Mm-hmm. You do not have to keep things if it's the last item available. It's the last one because everyone else already beat you to the decision that it wasn't working. If your patrons don't use it and you haven't interlibrary loaned it in years either, it's just sitting on the shelf taking up space that new materials could use.
Yeah. Try not to get caught up into that. There are other libraries that will collect for what I call saving the culture.
That is not the job of your neighborhood public library.
Yeah.
We're going to talk quickly about some weeding personalities. We have the hoarder. Again, we are not talking about clinical hoarding. We are being sensitive to that. This is just the idea that people can't bear to part with anything. They have sentimental feelings about the books. They don't care about the information in the books, but it's a book. You can't just throw away a book. So that's the hoarder. Then we have the randomizer who weeds a little too casually, almost recklessly.
That like with a machete.
The professor follows the crew method to the letter. They go through those musty factors. They have to analyze every item, even when it's an obvious weeder. They want to know the total circs, the last circulation, all of it. When it's like, really, it's being held together with duct tape and a prayer. So move on. The snob believes that you must have items that are listed in that public library core collection reference book, or that every library, regardless of the community, regardless of the budget or the space that they have, must have those seminal works. You must have, what some white guy put on a list of classic titles. They believe that the library offers up the best opinion on what's considered tasteful or appropriate.
And I'm going to say that I've worked with a couple librarians that were kind of the opposite. They wouldn't buy things people were requesting because the snob felt that was beneath their...
Yeah, the Kardashian biography that people are begging for and that would circulate. How many times that people would truly enjoy? No, we had to have Tolstoy instead, which never left the shelf. Not that there's anything wrong with Tolstoy. But so the idea,
it's just you can have it work against you as well.
The idea is that we all have a little bit of each of these in us, and we all probably have a tendency in one, direction or the other. I tend to be a little bit professor. I like to know total circs and last circulation. And even if I know it's going away, I'm curious about how it did during its life. It's a good idea to have someone else look over your weeding cart before they're withdrawn. Just what do they know that you don't?
Holly and I have made this an art. I was going to say, Holly is 14, 15 years younger than I am. And so 14. We find ourselves having way different interpretations of things. And so if you can find someone who's maybe different from you and different how you think, to maybe do a double check, that's another way.
Diversity of thought is fantastic.
Absolutely. And in other words, if there are people that are just enough different that might have a different take, not saying you have to follow it, but it's always good to get an input there.
And lastly, we have one more slide, but I want to say it's okay to be wishy-washy on a couple of things. Just keep them. And I'm saying a couple of things. You can't be indecisive about everything. You have to step back and be more objective. But if you just can't bear to part with your one favorite, but no one else likes it, you're not going to ruin the collection with your one favorite. Keep it. It's fine. So everything is connected. The very last part of all of this is that library quality and the success of the library happens when all of those departments and all of the pieces of that collection life cycle are considered together as a big picture. When all of the collections and the services and the programs and the technology and the building itself complement each other and the workflows are efficient in all of the areas. Mistakes are going to happen. Human error happens. If you have really holistic, really connected procedures in place, you'll find the errors and you'll fix them and you'll move on. It's when you have really systemic errors happening that you're not catching, that's a bigger problem. And we're going to leave it there. It is 6 minutes after the hour. I'm so sorry we went 6 minutes late. We are happy to stick around if people have questions.
You can also write us later at
it will not hurt our feelings if you have to log off. We promised you an hour and we're good for whatever else other time.
The sad thing is Holly and I could talk about this all day, literally.
We won't though. I'm actually going to stop sharing so I can see the chat.
And feel free to come and write us later at submit@awfullibrarybooks.org. .net. Sorry, forgot our own website.
Go to awfullibrarybooks.net and just click on submit. That's all you need to do.
And we're happy to answer questions because I know sometimes you might think about it and chew up stuff.
I'm looking at the chat and I'm looking for any questions, but if you have new ones, please. Looks like there are not any.
Well, thank you so much for being tolerant of our overtime here.
We have so much to say.